Kellyanne, we watch you almost every morning, it seems, on television. And I wasn't even going to ask this question, so I hope I don't get in trouble for asking it, because all this had to be cleared. But what's that been like for you? I mean, you've been in the public domain. You know, you were on Bill Maher back in the day and other shows, I remember. But now to be in that line of fire, you know, and defending this president every single day, you do such a great job. But they seem to really go after you, and you handle it so well. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I appreciate that, Ralph. And first of all, thank you for welcoming me back to Faith and Freedom. Thank you all for being here and for everything that you do for this great nation we all call home and that we love so very deeply every single day of your lives. I really appreciate you, and in part wanted to come today to tell you that and to tell you thank you on behalf of all of us at the White House. So in terms of television appearances or radio appearances, it's not something I expected to do when I agreed to come into the White House. I specifically did not want to be press secretary or comms director or spokeswoman. I really wanted to work on policy, and the president, to his enormous credit, agreed with that. But it turns out that the sheer volume and velocity alone of the way he works, coupled with the very unfair and ubiquitous mistreatment of him personally and misunderstanding of his policies as they are going forward and being executed, demands that an array of different people are out there, both defending, Ralph, to use your word, but really explaining and amplifying what it is the president is doing for the country. My main complaint has always been that the media don't cover the issues that necessarily affect Americans, and that Americans tell the media's pollsters they actually want to hear. That's the irony. If you look at the polling from the major media outlets and you see the answers among Americans as what they say is most important to them or what they want the president and the Congress to focus on most, it does not match whatsoever with what said outlets cover on the television news or in print in the paper. It's so disproportionate. The Russian investigation, for example, in one of the most recent CNN polls is down on the list as compared to the economy or healthcare or immigration and the like. And so that's always a great irony. I go and I only talk about things I know about, and I think everybody should follow suit perhaps, because there are other experts who are better voices for the president on an array of issues. But I think it helps to know the president and the way he makes decisions, and to very much believe in the agenda that got him elected, and to very much deeply respect President Trump, Vice President Pence, their wives, their families, our cabinet, and certainly the men and women in uniform. So if I can amplify a few messages that help this country remain safer, more prosperous, our government more accountable, I'm happy to do it. I also just am much more calm and confident than it seems many people who are asking the questions. I won't name them, but I don't know what's got everybody so miserable, to be honest with you. What happened?
I think we know.
I mean, I just think yes, we do know. I do know what has everybody so miserable. But I don't think that it's our job to defend so much as explain and educate and inform, so much as it is the media's job to attack. I think that it's perfectly fine and it's within their right to be skeptical or to hold the government accountable or to ask questions. But why the same question 10 times? And why the scowl on the face? And why what I have called from day one the presumptive negativity? It's always so presumptively negative. I mean, and then ignoring facts and figures that actually matter to Americans. So I'll just give you a couple quick examples. From just this month, it's only June 8th, from just this month, the jobs numbers for the 7th time, Ralph, since 1970 only. So think about that, 48 years times 12 months, well, let's say 11 months and then 6 months this year, 5 months this year. But think about that. Think about how many thousands of data reports we're talking about. For the 7th time only, we've had unemployment below 4%. Unemployment is record low. I mean, that's incredible. And if you just heard of that for the first time, consumers of news all, activists all, then therein lies my point. and part of the challenge.
And you're saying that's never happened before?
It's only happened 7 times since 1970.
Seven
In 48
times.
years, it's only happened 7 times. And the rest you know about. The lowest unemployment numbers ever among African Americans and Hispanics, among women in about 18 or 19 years, lower among teens. We now have 6.7 million available jobs in this country, Ralph. That exceeds the number of people who say they're looking for a job. So that actually gives you more job security and more job availability. You are not stuck where you are. This is a president that has invested in workplace development, in skills education and training, what he and I used to call vocational educational training. I mean, where I grew up, definitely majority when I graduated high school did not go to college at that time. They do now. But they graduated with a skills certificate and a high school degree, and they went to work the next day as a mechanic, a hairdresser, a carpenter, a welder, and they supported themselves and their families for the rest of their lives. And so this is a president that's been investing in the economy, but we're also being respected on the world stage again. He is doing what he promised to do, which is take issues that were mired in low single digits, if not an asterisk, lower than 1% in the polls, Ralph, like religious liberty, or like trade, or like illegal immigration, and catapult them up into our consciousness and on the agenda in a way that he thinks is more fair to America, to Americans, to American interests, and to American workers. So I'm quite comfortable in explaining out all the good that's going on. I think it took me a little bit of a while to understand that with the White House behind you, you're speaking on behalf of America and to America. And I don't return the snark and bark in kind. Perhaps one day I will, you'll have to read the book. But for now, I'll just keep my counsel and smile through it all. I also find smiling through it is very disarming for the other side because they're hardly ever smiling.
Well,
I'm not sure some people even have teeth. I haven't seen them in a while.
Well, Kellyanne, I know I speak not only for our 1.7 million members, but frankly, millions of others around the country. You make us proud every single day when you go out there and represent this president and this administration.
Thank you, Ralph, but right back at you, because I feel like all 1.7 million were knocking on doors in 2016 and will again this year, I'm sure, and will again in 2020. And that's the key. You're not going to read those stories everywhere. You're not going to hear that data very often, but we know it matters. It certainly mattered in the last presidential election because we had a fraction of the personnel and a fraction of the budget, but we had grassroots supporters and we had people who may not have become household names or screaming on the nightly news or giving quotes to the paper, but boy, they were there. They were there on election day, but they were there before election day, really priming the pump and knocking on the doors and showing the difference between the two major candidates and their philosophies. And of course, we had the two greatest assets for which there is no substitute. Donald J. Trump, Michael R. Pence, the two greatest assets we had on the campaign, getting out there and being with the people, which matters so much. So that's part of what we continue to do. The president makes himself accessible again this morning on the South Lawn as he was leaving for the G7 in Canada, followed by an historic summit in Singapore with the current leader of North Korea. Day after day, again, the sheer volume and velocity of the way the president works is really stunning. But when he came to Washington, he came owing nobody anything. And that is quite different. They say, well, he's not a typical politician or he's a disruptor. All that is true, but think for a moment what that really means. This is a president who says even when he was in Washington for business purposes, he really rarely, if ever, spent the night. He didn't have this connection to the different organizations and organs and individuals that are Washington. And some people have criticized that as a lack of familiarity with the system. I think most Americans appreciate it as not being beholden to a system that has trillions of dollars in deficits and I know you want to get to a couple questions. Let me say, this is a president also that tends to keep the promises of many presidents. When you look at something like right to try, which the president passed, he signed into law last week, that is something that other presidents said they wanted to do, wanted to try to do. When you look at this president keeping the promise of 4 or 5 perhaps presidents those presidents promised on day one, on week one, when I get there, if you elect me, I will move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. I will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But only one president got it done. And I think that's very disarming too. You could not have had that. You could not have had that, I think, with a typical politician. He thinks like a businessman. I appreciate, there would be no point in me being there, literally, if he wasn't somebody who respected and sought out and listened to the counsel of a diverse group of people in the White House, different viewpoints, different backgrounds. But in the end, he makes the decision because he's the one who got elected to do so.
You know, you talked about the issues that the president has elevated. And one of them I know is very important to you. It's very important to us, and that's the issue of life. He's the first president to address a March for Life by video hookup. The vice president is the first vice president to address the March for Life in person. The president just announced that his Department of Health and Human Services was going to promulgate regulations that would prevent the use of taxpayer funds in the Title X family planning program from being used to perform abortion. You're somebody who's a deeply committed pro-lifer, and really you came out of this movement. So could you talk a little bit about, I think it may have surprised some people because some were skeptical of the president's views on this, and there's an argument that can be made. This is the most pro-life president we've ever had.
Yes,
and so could you talk about how that goes on inside the councils of the administration and his leadership?
Yes, and Ralph, there's no question, as the vice president has said, as I've said, as you just said, as many have noted, even his critics, he is on track to be the most pro-life president in American history. And part of that is because he kept the promises he made. Candidate Trump could not have been more explicit on the campaign trail. He said in interviews, he said during the debates and in other forum that he would, if elected, he would defund Planned Parenthood, take its money away from performing abortions under Title X, and if they choose to no longer perform abortions, if they choose to separate the physical facilities, then that may be a different matter. But he also made good on the commitment to elevate and nominate judges like Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, but like 21 other U.S. Circuit Court judges, 21 U.S. Circuit Court judges through the president's nominations and the leadership of Leader McConnell and a bitterly divided Senate getting through those 21 U.S. Circuit Court judges. 1/8 of the U.S. Circuit Court judiciary right now is a Donald Trump appointee nominee. And we've only been here for 16 months. That's an incredible thing. And that's the way you see a lasting legacy. That's the way you see a legacy long after he leaves the presidency 6.5 years from now. You see a long, just saying. You'll see a long legacy of pro-lifers. But he also, days on the job, reinstated Mexico City policy and then went a little bit further and directed the Secretary of State at that time, Mr. Tillerson, to do it with NGOs. He, of course, has spoken like a pro-lifer, meaning he tells everybody, I'm for the sanctity of life. Addressing the March for Life was a very important moment. And it's one of these things, it's a great example, Ralph, of something I say often in the job as counselor to the president. I literally walk around and say, why didn't anybody do that before? It strikes me as brand new information. I have to go back and look, could that possibly be true? When I scour for myself, do my own independent research, how could that possibly be true? We certainly have had great pro-life presidents and vice presidents in the past. What were they so afraid of? Why not just go address blocks away or through a video hookup? And so it took, I want the record to reflect that it took a Manhattan male billionaire for whom most of his adult life was pro-choice, to become the most pro-life president in American history. And I think these calls have been fairly easy for him when he saw the actual data and not just the screaming talking heads. The number of qualified women's health centers in this country far outnumber the number of Planned Parenthood facilities. In a place like Maine, just saying, in a place like Maine, you have 4 Planned Parenthood, just hypothetically speaking, you have 4 Planned Parenthood facilities in the state, and they're all pretty much in the southern part of the state. You have hundreds and hundreds of qualified women's health centers. And so there it's not even close. And that is a great example of how the money will be given to these qualified women's health centers, which do provide women's health centers, but don't perform health services, but don't perform abortions. So this president, I think, on October 19th, 2016, really put away his opponent, that woman who lost the election, whose name I never say anymore. Lest I be accused of saying it anymore.
Well,
and he said, you'll remember, he took the pro-life messaging of 20-some years that some of us had worked on, Ralph, that nobody, even the most pro-life candidates, had never really said quite that way. He put it in his own words, and he basically said, you're the extreme one. You would rip a baby out of its mother's womb an hour before it's born. And the country, I think, reflexively went, ooh. And I thought, that's terrific. And those are his words, and he has said it again since, and he absolutely believes that we should call it out, how extreme that is, that I don't know what you're apologizing for. I don't know what you're apologizing for when you are trying to protect unborn life and support that life after it's born as well. And the other side is defending sex selection abortions. They're defending late-term abortions. They're defending taxpayer abortions. They're defending abortions after you can detect a heartbeat, after the half stage of pregnancy, when nonpartisan doctors and scientists say a baby can feel pain in the womb. We have all these happy measurements too, the success of in utero surgeries while you're still pregnant, the success of helping that baby survive. And I want to give a shout out to the First Lady also, our incredible, amazing First Lady, Mrs. Melania Trump. One of the many issues that she is tackling as part of her Be Best initiative is to help the neonatal abstinence syndromes babies. We have roughly 100 newborns brought into this world every day in this country struggling for their first breaths. They're born struggling for their first breaths. They're already chemically dependent on opioids or on heroin, meth, something else. And she has taken this as one of her major issues. I've traveled with her. We've all listened to her. And I believe that she will help increase awareness and increase action, inspire action on such an important issue.
Well, Kellyanne, I just want to tell you how grateful we are to you for your service to this president and to this cause to this country. You were required because of the rules that involve government service. You had to sell your company. You had to relocate your family. You've come under personal attack for defending the administration. And I want you to know that we pray for you and your husband and your children.
Thank you.
On a daily basis.
That's what we need. Thank you.
And I know you feel it, and we're proud of you, and thank you for all you do.
That's what we all need. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you so much.
God bless you. We love you. I mean it.